this way, but
Hi guys, this is Ayolua, the payment guy. You can call me Higher Love is God. And in this tutorial, I will be talking about EMV tags, the purpose of EMV tags generally, right? This will be a brief overview of EMV and the EMV tags, right? We'll talk about the history. We'll talk about we talk about what those tags are, the history of EMV, card payment, and their importance, what those tags are, different types of tags, and all in payment, right? Um, so yeah, um, like I said, my name is Ayodua Alashinde, and this would be a bit of introductory series. However, at the end of the series, listeners and people, whoever follow this tutorial series should be able to differentiate between different EMV tags and their categories, and it should help them in their work, help them in what they do, help them in understanding payments, and all that, right? And then majority of the audience, right? Who are the audience for this video? It's mostly for payment engineers. You are doing EMV payment, ISO 8583, you're a POS engineer, you are an EFT engineer, payment engineer generally, the audience for this particular series. All right, so um, let's go to a brief history of EMV, right? Um, EMV stands for Europay, MasterCard, and Visa. Uh, they are the founding companies of that standard, right? EMV is a standard when it comes to card payment. Yeah, card payment, not just card payment these days. Contactless payment and some other things, right? But let's just put it as card payment, right? It's a standard when it comes to card payment. Um, just like you have different ISOs. So, for example, ISO 583 or ISO 2002, which are ISO standards for payment transactions that flow from one issuer to another, or from one acquirer to an issuer, and all that, right? EMV is typically for card payment, and mostly is typically for is a standard for communication between cards and card acceptance devices, right? So the standard, how it should be, what it should be like, and all that, right? So it's a standard, right? Um, and then the three companies that established those standards are Europay, Mastercard, and Visa, right? It's a global standard for chip-based payment cards and acceptance, right? So cards that doesn't have chips in them, they are not chip based, they are not cards that are not chip based, they are not EMV cards, right? We have some other cards like my fair cards, my fair death fire, and all that, right? Those cards are not EMV based, right? Even though they try to mimic and structure those cards to follow this standard in a way, but they are not EMV cards, right? And what is the purpose of EMV? The purpose of EMV is to enhance security in cards transaction and reduce frauds, right? Before EMV cards, we have magnetic cards, and those magnetic cards are what those magnetic cards are, right? Is the device reads the card details from the magnetic stripes that is placed on the card, right? And those times it's easier to replicate those cards. It's easier to clone a card. You cannot tell the authenticity of a transaction. Um, you cannot tell the authenticity of a transaction when you're using chip and pin, right? And when you're using magnetic stripe card, right? So it needs to be a chip and pin, what they call EMV transaction. It helps for, for authenticity of a card transaction, right? It reduces fraud and all that. So, um, going to the next thing, EMV cards versus magnetic stripe card. Like I was saying, right? We have uh, installed data on magnetic stripes, and it can be easily copied. It's susceptible frauds and all that, right? EMV cards doesn't allow that. You cannot duplicate it. Each transaction is unique. We have a microprocessor chip that stores data. So it's not stored on a magnetic stripe, right? um we have verification, which is kind of that verification. It could be pin, it could be signature. There's some AME cards that allow no verification, right? No CVM, right? But still, yet it's still better than a max stripe, right? This is fraud. And you cannot clone. It's not easily cloned, right? It's not like you can't clone an EMV card, but there's difficulty in cloning an EMV card. um Going back now to EMV tags, right? We're looking at couples of EMV tags, right? So first look at the definition of EMV tags. EMV tags are identified and used to label a specific piece of data within a transaction, right? So if your card communicates with your POS, there are data that is being transferred between the card and the POS, and at the end of the day, that is transferred between the POS. I would say POS, just for a proper understanding. And device here could be a phone that an application is running on it and is using the soft pulse technology, right? So it could be any device, but for um, simplicity's sake and communication sake, I would be using the POS a lot, right? Okay, so when a communication between a card and a POS, you see some pieces of data that flies back and forth between those two. Between those two, the card and the POS, right? And then the POS send some data again upstream, right? Those datas are they're EMV data, or some people call them ICC data, right? Um, However, EMV tags helps you to identify uh, those particular data, right? Um, they define data elements, like I said, exchange between the card and terminal, right? Their importance in transaction, essential for the transaction flow, ensuring proper communication and processing between the card and the terminal. So I'll give you a good example, right? If the card requests for um, if the card requests for um, CVM list, card verification method list, the terminal rather request for card verification method list from a POS, right? Um, what happens is that the card responds with the card verification method, or the card holder verification method that it supports, and then based on that list is what helps the terminal to make the decision of how to process that transaction. Am I to ask for PIN? Am I not to ask for PIN? Am I to display a place for the user to put in their signature and all that, right? Um, what type of card data authentication am I to perform in this particular this particular transaction, right? And all that. So it helps to for both card and the terminal to make decisions during a particular EMV transaction, right? It could even help issuer, for example, right? Or an acquirer to do verifications, to do authentications and authorizations at the end, right? Okay, so we have types of EMV tags. We have the application tags, we have the transaction tags, right? What are application tags? Sure. Application tags and transaction tags, right? So application tags are related to application selection and initialization, right? So if you're familiar to EMV process, EMV process, the first initial processing EMV when the transaction between the card and the terminal is what they call application selection, or some people call it select application, right? Or card initialization, right? And the tags that have been responded with at that stage um, is what are called application tags, right? Um, Transaction tags are involved in transaction processes and risk management, right? Transaction tags are those that you send upstreams, that your acquirer or the issuer or the processor would have to validate and all that, right? For risk management, those are the tags that you use to perform risk management on the terminal, or you use to perform risk management with the acquirer and I mean, the whole. So we'll go to application tags, right? So application tags, we have tag 84, we have tag 4, we have tag 50, we have tag 87, we have tag 5F20, right? What is tag 4? Tag 84 is dedicated file name, right? They call it EF, right? Indicates the name of the application on the card. So just to digress a little, the chip that is on your card has applications on it, right? So I might have a card that has two applications on it, and those two applications are practically pointing to two different maybe accounts and all that, right? Or those two applications are pointed to the same account, but they're doing different things, right? The issuer might issue a card, like one is for transport and the other is for normal banking. So if the application is an application that sits on the card, that is for that's for transport purpose, right? Um, when I tap on a device or a terminal that is for transport purpose, the device is supposed, or is supposed to choose the application on the terminal that is made for the sole purpose of transport, right? If, if if I tap on the payment terminal, the terminal is supposed to choose the application that is for the purpose of payment, right? Okay, so that's 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 the essence of so dedicated file name is the name of the application on the card, right? Most of the times it's still the AID, most times, right? That they use for the dedicated file name, right? It helps the terminal to identify and select appropriate application for the transaction, like I said. Um, we have application identifier. It's still the same thing in a way. However, it used to identify the card application. Like I said, we are actually almost talking about the same thing. Um, the user's terminal to recognize and communicate with the correct application. Consider they are actually almost the same thing, right? We have the application label. Application label contains a human readable name of the application. For example, you see Visa, you see MasterCard, you could see Verve, you could see Europay on the terminal or the ATM screen, right? Or the ATM screen. We have the tag 87, which is the application priority indicator. What that does is help us to know the priority of the application on the card, right? So what that typically do is for terminal that are set to select application with the highest priority, right? The terminal is able to know that, oh, this is the application with the highest priority and this application I will go with, right? Because there might be a lot of applications on the card that are not used or that are lower priority, right? So the card would have to work with the card will have to work with the terminal with the highest priority, right? I'm sorry, the application with the highest priority, right? And then we have the card holder name. Typically is used to get the name of the card holder that is on the terminal, right? Those are application tags, right? We have tag. Then we have transaction tags. Transaction tags I mean, these are the basic ones. These are not all the tags, right? We are still going to more details, more detailed, tags and all that, right? But these are just the basic ones, most common ones that you would come across apparently. Well, when you're doing EMV transactions and all that, or you're trying to, you know, do troubleshoot problems and all that. So we have the transaction tags. So transaction tags. We have 9F20, which is amount, authorized amount, specifies the amount authorized for the transaction, right? Typically, it tells the amount to be debited, right? So that is being sent from the terminal to the card. What you notice between application tags and transaction tags is most of the application tags, and I can use in all of the application tags, comes from the card, whereas the terminal specifies some tags for the transaction tags. You get right. So the source of application tags are solely the card, right? Whereas the, let me use the word value. The value for the transaction tags, some of the transaction tags, the value comes from the terminal, right? Um, we have the transaction date. It tells us the date of the transaction. It's used for auditing purposes. We have cryptogram information system data. Tell us type of cryptogram and information about it and all that, right? Um, that is the kind of cryptogram that was generated, right? What are the, just for the purpose of, of, of security, right? Application transaction counter. Um, so let me dwell on 9F27, right? 9F27, for example, if a transaction was declined offline, right? And the terminal decides to send it upstream. The acquirer is supposed to check the cryptogram information data and know the kind of cryptogram that was generated, right? So if what was generated was a denier and it was sent upstream, the acquirer is supposed to actually deny that transaction, refuse that transaction before it even goes out to the processor or the issuer, right? So let's go to 9F36 application transaction counter. The counter increments with each transaction is just to detect duplicate transaction and manage transaction sequence. Unpredictable number, just to prevent relay attack, ensuring that transaction is unique. We have 9C transaction type. This tells the card, now you see, it tells the card what kind of transaction I'm doing, and then it tells the acquirer, the processor, to what kind of transaction I'm doing. Specify the nature of the transaction for processing and record keeping. Terminal verification result. This particular one is for the purpose of the checks that were performed on the terminal, right? Did the terminal do card without the card data authentication on the terminal? Do what kind of CVM did the terminal did? And some other things, right? The TVR, that's tag 95, tells us what those things are, right? And then an acquirer can use TVR to approve or decline or refer a transaction. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next video. You can search for me, the payments guy, Love is God, your Love is God, on any social media, and yeah, thank you. See you in the next video.